All right, the button pressing has commenced, and here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I so appreciate that you are choosing to listen. Are you new to the show today? If so, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How are you? How are things with you in this moment? I hope reasonably well. For anyone who has been listening along and hearing me speak about the current state of the yoga industry and sort of what seems like a very gloomy portrait of the situation, well, I want to report that this week I had some realizations and minor breakthroughs regarding my own personal baggage around money and marketing. And for anyone who's been listening, you know I have personal baggage around money and marketing. And it came out of a comment that I received from a new friend named Karen. Shout out to you, Karen. She has been attending my classes and recently joined my teacher training program. And we were in my weekly teacher Sangha a few days ago. She made this comment to me. She said, Jay, I feel like you have two different personalities. And at first I was very taken aback by that. I don't like the sound of that, like I'm two-faced or something, but that's not what she meant. What she said was that when she's taking my class and I'm leading practice and instructing people on the principles of yoga practice, she feels like I have a very consistent, joyful, and lighthearted energy that I bring to that. But when she hears me talking about the yoga center on the podcast, it feels like really heavy and like kind of cynical and like it's not the same energy. Now, I'd like to think that the person you hear talking to you right now on the podcast is the same person that you're going to meet if you come to my class. And generally speaking, I think that's true. But what I think is the difference is that for that hour when Karen's taking my class, I'm putting on my yoga teacher hat and I'm playing a very specific role. And I take that role very seriously, and I do look to bring a consistency of energy to that, even when I'm depleted. And, you have to be honest about that. You can't fake it. It has to be real, But I've worked over the years to be consistent so that when I show up to teach a class, I'm bringing a certain energy, a certain attention, a certain curiosity to that, because that's what I want to model, because that's what I love about yoga. That's what rejuvenates me. That's what leads to what I have observed to be transformative exchange between me and other people. And when I'm on this show here and I'm talking about the yoga center or even just talking about teaching, I'm not like trying to be your yoga teacher. This is like a different context. I'm taking my yoga teacher hat off and sort of pulling back the curtain. I'd like to think I'm still the same personality, but I'm not bringing the same energy. But it got me thinking that why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I bring the same sthira sukha and grounded energy that I want to bring when I'm teaching a class to like doing my marketing? Now, I don't really know if that's possible because, like I said, I've got personal baggage around marketing and I get really cynical about it because it feels like an impediment to me getting to do the yoga with people, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I've been exploring and trying to open up my mind a little bit and basically just like get over myself some. And it led to a few new things. And I'll tell you more about some of what it led to on the other side of today's conversation, because I want you to hear it first, but it has to do with the evolution of yoga practice and what the role of the teacher is, and situating that for myself in such a way where I might be able to bring more of the energy that I bring to my teaching to the handling of my marketing. So I don't want to go into it here. I don't want to be long-winded here in the intro, but I will return to this on the other side of today's conversation. If you want to tune into the other side, I'll tell you about some more of the things that this line of thought has led to in me. But it also dovetails with my conversation today with Adam Keen. Adam is the host of the Keen on Yoga podcast. He has been on the show before. It was some years ago. You'll hear we talk about it. And recently I've mentioned this, that there was some turmoil and scandal in the Ashtanga yoga community. And it's not the same thing as like a few months ago when I had some people on to talk about some of the issues around certifications and authorizations since Sharat passed. I sort of dipped my toe in that, but very carefully, because as I've been mentioning, I'm not really interested in sensationalizing stuff that I've only heard about on the internet. And in some ways, I'm not interested in rehashing conversations we've already had before. I want to look towards something substantive about how we can understand what's happening. And recently, Adam did an episode on his podcast, which he called his Ashtanga Yoga Manifesto. And I really appreciated it. I felt like he was bringing a lot of insight and heart to addressing some of the issues and speaking to what the role of a yoga teacher is now, given what we've come to learn about yoga and given where people are. And I've had some like ongoing questions just about the Ashtanga system and the adjustments. And Adam was the perfect person for me to talk to. And I was so glad to connect with him again. It is my pleasure to be bringing it to you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention a few things. I've got an upcoming workshop at Boston Yoga Union in Brookline, Massachusetts, November 8th and 9th. So if you're going to be in the area, or you know someone who is, come hang out. I'm going to be there for 2 days at Boston Yoga Union in Brookline, Massachusetts, November 8th and 9th. Also, if you are enjoying this show and you feel like you get something from it, then perhaps you would consider supporting it by becoming a podcast premium subscriber. I'm not doing any ads, and I rely completely on listener support. For as little as $5 a month, you can have a very big impact on helping me to keep this going. And you also get access to the full-length archives, which is an incredible resource. So please consider supporting the show and becoming a podcast premium subscriber. There are also other ways for us to connect. If you're interested, I've got ongoing live classes and a weekly discussion group, on-demand continuing education. You can find all my stuff, the upcoming workshops, the podcast premium, and the rest at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. Like I said, I'll touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get into this. Let's listen to this conversation I had with Adam Keen. Hello?
Hey, Jay.
Hey, Adam. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's been a while, a few years.
I was just about to say that, but before, I know you know the deal, but I'm recording, so let's consider ourselves having begun,
I know.
right?
We can consider ourselves having begun. Yeah, I'm a regular listener to your podcast, so I know that drill.
Well, then you also are a podcaster yourself, so I'm not trying to trap anybody and catch anybody off guard anymore. None of that stuff anymore.
Oh, I hope I never really was doing that in the first place. But yes, increasingly a guest, let's say a friendly to our guests, not less interrogative than perhaps I started out at.
Well, I mean, I never would do it like intentional. It wasn't like I was trying to trap people. I just didn't mention to them and they didn't necessarily know I was recording. And so they would say all this stuff. And often it would be like the best, most honest glimpse of them. And I would love it. I'll never forget the one example that really, Larry Payne came on the show, who's like a big guy in the Desikachar and yoga therapy world. And he was just so candid. He was just like dropping F-bombs and like being really like fun and like off the cuff. And then when I told him that I was recording, he was like, oh, he didn't know. And he didn't want it to go out. He didn't want people to hear that. But I was like, that was such a cool part of him, and I actually did release almost two versions. One was the F-bombs cut out and but the F-bombs still in. So it's pretty funny.
The adult version. Yeah, the uncensored. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm well aware that we're recording. So unfortunately, you won't get you'll get the candid version anyway, because that's generally what I'm known for.
Yes.
So I shall speak freely. And it sounds like an interesting chat. I've been enjoying your podcast, and also your interest in getting into the Christian ideas, and so I've seen that increasingly creeping into your dialogue there.
It has. That's interesting. Maybe we can get there. I hadn't thought of that, but it's certainly something that I'm exploring. So I'm curious what your impression of that would be. But first, before we talk about that, even if we get to it, the reason I brought you here today was because of one of your recent episodes, although not just because of that. I've definitely been following your show. And, when we started today, I looked just before coming on with you, when did I last speak to Adam? When was he on the show? And I was genuinely stunned because it was November of 2021, which is
seriously
way far longer ago than I imagined. In my mind, it was a year or two.
Yeah, me too.
But it's 4.
But, it's one of those things. You get older. I think it's when you're young, you're always hoping, can I get a bit older? And it's gonna, and then as you get older, just hoping time stops. But
it does.
It's going too quickly. I was in the south of France then. I'm now in Athens, not living, but just currently teaching a workshop in Athens this weekend. So, moving around a bit.
Well, the other thing I took note of, I didn't go back and listen to it, but like the title of the episode from 2021 was Teachers and Teachings.
Oh, right. Yeah, it was somewhat on Chirac, wasn't it? And he had a birthday, and I wrote a kind of birthday post for him, and that attracted your attention at the time, I think. Yeah.
I think so, maybe. And it was just kind of, interestingly enough, essentially the conversation we're returning to again now, but
right.
Things have changed pretty drastically since we last discussed it. And I think the viewpoint is different. The yoga world is not the same in 2025 as it was in 2021. And there may have been a little writing on the walls, but in certain ways, things have come to pass. And let me frame this a little bit also, too, just for people listening, because there is a little more background for me as well, which is, there's been another recent scandal in the Ashtanga yoga world, and all of that has been happening.
Always forgot about that, yeah.
Yes, well, but the point is, I do think that had a lot to do with why you put out your yoga manifesto episode,
Yeah, I've always, the thing is, people say, some people say, well, you're kind of like, don't we need to drag this up? And, it almost, I felt like there was a little bit like, you often see this kind of cashing in on an idea or something that happens. So, people could then kind of generate content and get their name out there. And, it's a rather cynical take, I suppose. But I think there is probably a bit of that. But I've always been on that thing about the teachers. That's the thing. And just as I said, there's a fault line that runs through modern teaching, and this giving our authority away to the teacher. And I've always been anti that. I've always been even reluctant to call myself a teacher, really, in as much as I just kind of feel like I don't want people to defer to me. I want to be there as a support, as a helper. But the whole thing, especially, I don't know how it turns out in other styles. I've done a little bit of Iyengar when I started. I was doing Iyengar for a year or two. It was quite highly hierarchical there. And then in Ashtanga, obviously, yeah, it was massively deferential, right? The celebrity, the teachers really were like these celebrity kind of gods, and and the strictness, like I said, this idea that a good teacher is a strict teacher, right? That if they're telling you to stop, and if they're telling you, do it like that, or not at all, kind of thing, right? We kind of
wait a second. Let me stop you for a second, because you're rolling through a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk about, and I want to ease listeners into it, because I don't know that everybody has the same background with the conversation we're having yet. So
okay,
I like what you were saying though about the fault lines and the giving way of your authority, because again, for me, the even reason I bring up the fact that there was that thing that's going on in the yoga world right now is because, after Sharat passed, I had a few people on because it did seem like there were sort of some issues at play. But very quickly, I pulled back away from it because it's so easily to be sensationalizing these things, particularly on the internet. And the whole point of the podcast is to get away from that kind of like sensationalizing thing, even though I may have been at fault in doing that in the early days of the podcast. I've looked to get away from that. So for me, what I saw is that in your episode, your response to it, like, because everybody, especially because you're in the Ashtanga world, they're like, what's your take, Adam, on what's going on? I'm getting emails asking me, like, what's your take?
Oh, really?
And are you gonna have people on your show to talk about this, Jay? And like,
I didn't get that many. I tell you why, Jay, because I'm not in that little group, of that little clique of modern Mysore teachers. I mean, and that was one thing I mentioned, I think, on my post, is that me and many other people, because we don't fit that narrative of being like the modern kind of strict Ashtanga teacher who controls people's practices, who gives people postures, right? Tells people when they can start, when they can stop. We weren't really consulted in any of it. And so I'm not seen as a traditional Ashtanga teacher, although I did my time in Mysore, I completed up to Advanced B series with Sharat. I was super like by the book, but yet because I don't teach in that kind of way, I don't tell people to stop. It's up to them. I'll give them pointers, I'll suggest different things, but their practice is theirs, right? Because I'm not like that, I wasn't approached at all. As I say, there's a small coterie of teachers that stand to represent as a representative for everyone, which is unfortunate, Yeah.
It is. And I think that, some of the recent kerfuffle, the reason why I haven't even talked about it on the show is because it does feel sometimes like, again, this sensationalizing of abuse, which I'm not interested in anymore. And I'm interested in a useful, substantive conversation about it, which is what I felt like you were trying to do in your manifesto. You're like, well, what are like what's to be learned from all of this, rather than the same old
go lynch the guy,
or whatever. And again, I'm trying to stay out of the fray of it because I don't think it's specific to Ashtanga. I've seen it in teachers of mine, these boundary crossing, this stuff, and I don't think it's across different traditions and schools of practice. This has happened. There does seem to be some conditions that seem to bring it about, and you're kind of alluding to them some, which has to do sort of the teacher-student dynamics and like, what is the role of yoga teacher? And I do think that has evolved and changed. Like a lot of us, like yourself, at some point began to question certain dynamics that were happening in the practice space. There's that expression, somatic dominance, like you were talking about, where you were saying like people have control over the practice, that kind of style of teaching where you'd like call someone out across the room and there was kind of like a shame factor to it.
Oh, for sure. The thing is, it's still happening, Jay.
That's my question. Do you think it's still happening like that?
Absolutely. Those very teachers, I tell you, some of those very teachers that are calling Taylor out, sorry to mention, they're also still, I would say, still guilty of the same mentality of the teaching, this rigid, controlling methodology, and they don't see it as one and the same, right? I mean, not to say that his actions were simply due to that, but my point was that there's this general underlying low-level abuse in the classroom, and that gives a subterfuge, an easy smokescreen for further abuse to occur underneath that. So I'm not saying that this particular instance, and there have been more than one, as we know, is because of this method of teaching, but it gives an easy cloak for them to be further manipulating students around this idea of control, because it already is a teaching methodology based on control. And that's not the way I think we need to see it. I don't think we need to approach Ashtanga like that. I don't think we need to approach yoga like that. I think, as you mentioned in the early start of the podcast, I do think the wheel is turning for yoga, and increasingly in the society we find ourselves in, which is dominated by individualism and self-autonomy, whether we like it or not, yoga has to go that way, and it has to dovetail with society and the current way that we hold our individuality in society. Otherwise, there's going to be more of a discordance with yoga and society, which would then also, I mean, we've already got enough to cope with in modern yoga, right? We don't want to see it increasingly dwindle because it's at loggerheads with the current way that we understand ourselves as individuals.
Well, I mean, that's very interesting that yoga should go the way of the way society's going, rather than see. That's was going to be my question, because you made this comment in your manifesto, which was like the extinction of traditional yoga. So does that mean that if we're like, for instance, this idea that you're having about teachings not being given in that way, like it not being about withholding the next pose and the teacher deciding which is the next pose you get, because that's a very Ashtanga specific thing, maybe, because it was very much about the sequence.
Yeah, so, absolutely. It is. Iyengar yoga is like that as well. Yeah.
So is that baked into the tradition? Can you really still call it Ashtanga yoga if that's gone?
Of course you can. And as I say, the Iyengar yoga is a bit like that as well, very authoritative. I mean, I left the Iyengar yoga because every time you did a posture, they say, "Oh no, take it back to half triangle, because there's no way you can approach that posture, right?" Like similar, but you're not quite kind of linear. The Ashtanga, it gives on to it. Obviously, it's this idea of a linear progression. You're making your way through. The person's controlling your progress because they know how much you can do, and one posture leads to the next, to the next, to the next. But I'm saying that the deeper narrative behind that is, though they don't. They don't. It was a jumble of postures that Krishnamacharya, if you look at the books, right, I think it's the Yoga Sangalu, primary, intermediate, advanced, jumble of postures, put them together in any way you want. Happens that Patanjali Joyce, my understanding is Patanjali Joyce put together with Krishnamacharya yoga demonstrations, and he put together certain sequences which we know as Ashtanga, but they don't follow a therapeutic way of opening the body. I mean, there's no methodology behind it, really, right? Like,
so it wasn't a papyrus leaf, though, huh? He didn't get it from a papyrus leaf, eh?
I've never heard the papyrus. I know banana leaves, but or rats or ants or eaten by. Listen, the thing is with the sequences, it doesn't follow a methodology, right? My point is, it's not a practice per se, because practice is defined by consistency and a step-by-step incremental approach. And with the Ashtanga, suddenly out of nowhere, Kapotasana, out of nowhere with no preparation, 100 chaturangas, basically 100 press-ups in a class. Most people, particularly women that dominate the scene of Ashtanga, they don't have that kind of strength in the lats and the trapezius to perform that. It's all going in the shoulders. There's no build-up. So what I'm saying is, we do have to reappraise this tradition and make it suitable, because, understanding its roots, understanding that it wasn't to be practiced as a complete physical practice, and that one posture doesn't lead to the next because they were a jumble put together for yoga performances, not for yoga therapy, it doesn't make it beneficial. It doesn't mean that we can't do it, but it just means that we kind of need to be aware of certain things in its roots that we need to apply for now, right?
I mean, I can certainly appreciate that. That's the same kind of arc that my own practice has taken, dabbling in different approaches and observing injuries in myself from them, or just being honest with myself about what actually helps me, like what not being able to accomplish poses. At some point, you can do a handstand press or you can do some big thing, and that's what got you credibility as a teacher at one point or another, because you could do that and nobody else in the room could. But at a certain point, that became a very hollow pursuit, like that. It was about being able to do handstands and teach people how to do handstands. That wasn't meaningful enough for me to keep doing it. That was just mediocre gymnastics.
Yeah.
So So,
exactly.
so in a way, it needed to become about something more than that. And in order to do that, it becomes more relational, like what's happening between you and other people. And you begin to see your role as a teacher as something different, not as the gatekeeper of asana, but as the facilitator of hopefully something that would be beneficial to that person.
Yeah. And to that end, and then I think we have to question, I mean, exactly your trajectory, just like mine, especially as an Ashtanga teacher, you're waking up super early. You're going to teach at 6 or 7 a.m., So you're waking up, as we were told to do, early in the morning, like 2, and doing this practice and these advanced asanas, right? And you're doing these every day, day in, day out. And then you start to think, like it speeds it up. It speeds this process of thinking up. What the hell am I doing? Why am I putting myself through this early in the morning just to do these, as you say, mediocre at best gymnastics? And that's when I started to inquire further into, to what the practice was. Was it a system of meditation, right? Like, it's structured, generally speaking, on Patanjali's yoga, right? Then we do the asanas and the pranayamas, blah, blah, blah. And I think, actually, no, if you look back, it's really a system of hatha yoga. It's, Ashtanga is just one variation of hatha yoga, meaning like a way to exert pressure on the spine, a way to use tapas to heat symbolically, to put pressure on the nerves of the spine to affect the change in the consciousness. I mean, it's a physical methodology, ha meaning forceful, right? And that's where I came down to it, So I started practicing, from a different mentality, trying to find the right tension, factoring the energy towards the spine to see, if we're looking at the old text, if we could actually, find a semblance between this original methodology of using the body to put the energy towards the center, in a certain reappraisal, because obviously we're not doing Kundalini anymore. And I'm not suggesting that we're using Hatha Yoga to try and, release the central channel of the Kundalini up the spine. But is there a root there? Is there a way that we can find that as a basis, that there's something to do with energy towards the center of our body in the way that we stretch that radically might affect the consciousness? Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I frame it in my mind a little bit differently than you are. For me, it's not about like stressing the spine. That you're a little bit more on the Bernie Clark song there, it seems to me. And I loved your episode with him, by the way. But I think for me, it became about sthira sukha. Like, what is sthira sukha? Like, what's the reason for the asana was to have an experience of sthira sukha, of this effortless effort, or this balanced effort, or this finding of a balanced effort in my system. And that does affect one's consciousness. That's what I think you're right, that there's a state, yoga as a practice and yoga as a state, and they go together. So if the yoga practice is geared towards sthira sukha and an exploration of what that is in your system, there's a state, a mind state that goes with that as well. And that's what I identified is why I do breathing and moving exercises now. And that became like the sole directive. And to try to find practices that seem to encourage that was the whole idea, which is a break from coming up with a whole bunch of sequences or kind of taking people through these yoga journeys of asana, or even like a lot of anatomy considerations in the asana. It's more about someone's experience of breath and their body and those two things in relationship,
I mean, yeah, again, like what you could say is that's still a sukha, if we're translating it on a practical modern level, is, the individual, relating your individuality to your sense of being something other than the individual, right? So it's like, it's that kind of the ego, and then something behind the ego that's also battling to let go of one's individuality. So there's this that still sukham. There's definitely like something. If you could do it at a bodily level, find the effort and the letting go, then perhaps we could do that, on a deeper level, on a mental level, to find the way that we have a volition, but also we need to be passive. The active, the passive sense of self, to do with ego and shadow. But I think the way that we're talking here is very much on a par with the general conversation, which is how can we reappraise modern yoga to do what we need it to do now? I mean, when you're talking about earlier, you said that perhaps I don't know how you put it exactly, but something to do with the tradition, and that maybe I was going against tradition, right? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely, because you look at the tradition that yoga comes from. I mean, I'm talking about Hatha yoga in the 7th century, like, stimulating the spine to release Kundalini. And then you were talking about Patanjali, which is a text which, it's between it's 2,000 years old, roughly, right? So, it's understandable that one, it's old, right? And, we've, as a society, have changed. Hesitate to say moved on, but at least we've changed some. And secondly, really, like, we're not monks living in a cave. I mean, it's likely Patanjali was probably writing for the monastic community. It's likely that these texts, these really high-end Kundalini texts about raising consciousness and exploding the sense of individuality, were also for people not living in the world. And where do we find ourselves? All of us are living in the world, trying to have a family, hold down jobs, have a normal life. So we need to reappraise these methodologies. And so, we can't look at yoga traditionally, as they might say, well, the guru gives you your posture, you devote to the guru, absolute authority to the guru. Basically, you become the guru. Basically, the guru is trying to destroy this disciple, the shishya, completely and make them. That is the severity, or if we could call it that, of the teacher-student relationship originally. So do we have to reappraise that? Well, yeah, of course we do, because this is not the yoga that we're doing now. Yeah? Does that mean that we can't root it in something which is traditional and old? But
well,
we have to.
That last point is what I was just thinking. I do think that there is a thing that's happened where, yes, there's sort of within yoga these very different viewpoints. So as you and I both have through our shows had all these people come on to talk about sort of different traditions and philosophical viewpoints. There are like householder teachings as well as ascetic teachings. So you could kind of find threads of yogic teachings to apply to modern life in ways. So I think there's that evolution that has definitely happened in terms of the reassessment of yoga for like modern times. But I also think something else has happened where, there's been this like marketization. You said we all have families and lives that we're trying to lead, and there's become this yoga industry. And in a way, like having yoga practice be about like the big questions that you and I just immediately went to. Who am I? Why am I doing this? You could say that is more traditional yoga these days, like that yoga practice even has something to do with more than strength and flexibility, or has to do with some kind of teacher-student relationship that is a deeper inquiry into the nature of our existence or something along those lines. To me now in 2025, maybe more than in 2021, like yoga practice that is still focused on that or still like holding that as like its foundation is more traditional. Like I said in my recent piece, like people aren't even really looking for yoga teachers anymore. And I guess I'm curious if in your circles, are you having to compete with like the boutique fitness centers? Because in a way, in my mind, Ashtanga yoga has been one of the areas that's been able to kind of retain more of like this traditional thing with Mysore rooms even. It's not like a subscription to the hot center with Pilates and bar and like that whole model, which I'm sure you've seen because it's all over the world now. So I guess the real question is, and I'm rambling and spiraling in lots of different directions, but I guess the kind of question I'm getting at has to do with, is it still possible? Are people still making a living teaching Ashtanga yoga? Like if you have a Mysore room, are you able to do that? Like how much do you rely solely on your income as a teacher in your household? And if so, are you able to be more of a traditional teacher and have it be about all these beautiful things that you and I have come to understand yoga as? Or do you have to make decisions in order to get enough people in the door to be able to pay the rent? You know what I'm saying?
I think you said lots of things there.
Yes.
Well, first of all, to answer your question, the easy one on the practical level, yeah, it's difficult. I think that the yoga is, let's say there's more competition. And is it more popular? Yes, but there's also way more competition. So where you would have got 100 people coming to London for a workshop because there was only one Ashtanga teacher, now you've got an Ashtanga teacher in every town and city. So you've got a lot more people doing it, but of course those students are spread out over a lot more people. So it seems like yoga is waning in popularity. I don't think so. I'd say that there are just more and more teachers, really. Are there less students? Well, I also think that people are attracted to other things. I mean, everything has its day, and I think yoga currently does need to do some updates. I do think on the way it's being taught and the way it's being handled. And yeah, when people are getting back into gym, I think that's become, the recent bro craze a new phase, hasn't it? And Pilates is becoming popular again. So, yes, I mean, to answer your question at a simple level, I think it's increasingly hard for most Ashtanga teachers to make ends meet just by running a Mysore. Yes, I think that was a golden day. I don't know whether it was really representative or of something that I mean, it was just a fluke for a number of years that people managed to do it rather than
a little bubble, a little bubble we had for about a decade or something, right?
Something that should be a viable prospect that you could work a few hours a day and get enough people to make a living out of it. I mean, I do many things, and I do manage to make a living for myself and Teresa, my wife. But yeah, if I was just running a Mysore room, God, that would be tough. So no, I don't just do that. And yeah, I think it is really, really hard for modern Ashtanga teachers. It's a competitive world. I think that in market forces being that there's a saturation of the market with more students, more teachers really than there are almost students. So everyone's a yoga teacher, right? So they're all competing, and then that leads to it easily leads to yoga popularism, which is what I would call it, which is that teachers generally have to feel like they have to give that extra thing to define themselves as something more than the teacher next door, because there's so many teachers. So that that let's not call it inauthenticity, but that need to compete in a market makes teachers need to sell themselves and sell their yoga as different, special, other, because people can drop in. I mean, one problem is people could just drop into your class, have a one-off class, right, and then say, it wasn't that good, because you would try to build it, you would try to be careful, you would try to give them good extraction, and they're thinking, well, where are the handstands, where are the back bends? The other teacher was playing music and they were giving all these handstands, and so
they rubbed oil on me at the end, or whatever.
They give me a little massage, whatever, so I can go there straight away. So you've got to go like one shot at keeping a student, right? And if you can imagine how the yoga teachers are often feeling stressed anyway, because the centers might be pressuring your numbers, or simply they're renting a place and they need a certain number. I mean, it's bums on seats, isn't it? And again, at the end of the day, it is. And so in terms of numbers, that makes it easy to fall to the problems of popularism. Yeah? Rather than, if you just had a few high-paying clients, that would obviously change the dynamic again. But it isn't that way. You said, you were kind of talking or reflecting on aims, I think, a little bit, in terms of people's aims and are they aiming? I think you also mentioned that on what you wrote to me before. Are they still aiming for something other than just fitness? I do believe people are. I think we can only be as we are. And I think the human being seeks to fulfill its sense of inadequacy or lack inherently in whatever we do, and that will come forward if you keep at anything, whether it be gym, whether it be yoga. I think anything that you do almost consistently with an inquiring mind, it will bring you to the same questions in the end. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's true. I think I'm in agreement with that. I guess my question has to do with this idea of the numbers and getting bums in the seats and how to contend with that.
Yeah.
And I think that, I've been able to kind of like finance my ability to have an in-person space and have what feels to me like the most authentic yoga that I get to have with people was just like people from my neighborhood showing up.
It's an amazing thing you've done there. I mean, really, kudos to you for trying it out.
I've been able to finance that because of things that I've done online, or because of as of yet, it's not really, it doesn't make enough money on its own for some of the reasons that you kind of pointed to in terms of like my ability to compete with what's going on out there and the immediate gratification that I'm not providing people or whatnot. But I guess when you said, and I mean, you don't have to give details necessarily, but I'm just curious about the viability of our profession of yoga as a profession. So like if you can't make a living off of a Mysore room and you do other things to provide the income that you need for your household, do you mean other things outside of yoga, or you just have like a lot of different things you're doing with yoga to bring in more money? Like, do
Yeah,
you
no,
have
that's-
another money gig that helps bring money into your house? Because I'm saying if I
wish I
actually
did
could
pay.
find
No,
that,
no.
if someone
Yeah, yeah.
wanted to pay me to do something with communications or podcasting or something that I have skills with,
Something else.
and I
Yeah,
could
yeah, yeah, you
make some more money and then take the pressure off and then just let the yoga be the yoga, I'm open to that. I'm just wondering, is it viable? Do we need to do that at this point? Can you still actually make it without having to do that?
Yeah. I mean, that would change the yoga scene completely, wouldn't it? I mean, and you and I got into yoga when every teacher that we went to, well, bar a few, right? They usually had a normal job, right? They would do the day job, then they'd come and teach the yoga class at the night time, right? Or they'd teach in the morning and they'd go and
changed
work
a little
in the
bit.
day.
It became a career where it seemed like maybe it wasn't always true. Maybe they had a rich spouse that we didn't know about.
Possibly. Sometimes,
but
yes.
It felt like, oh no, this was a career and it had an idea. And even these days it's promoted. Like if you get more training and you become more experienced, then you're going to be able to make more money. And I just don't know that it's true.
For some, for very few, it's true. And for most, it's a slog because there is such a huge competition in this, let's call it industry, yoga, as a professional career, which it wasn't, before that. And that has obviously when people need that, when there's that pressure of making enough money because you've got children, I know, I haven't, but especially if you have a family, I can only imagine how tough it is. I really can. I mean, for me, I've been lucky. I don't live, I don't live a life of luxury, right? But Teresa and I do okay. We do some retreats, do some workshops. I teach online as well. We just about get by. Right? I mean, I always said I wouldn't have got into this work if I really was hell bent on making a lot of money, but it still goes okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that I think everyone's struggling, and I do think that there are a hell of a lot of yoga teachers, and that forces people to try and sell their yoga, and hence we have this this, as you say, instant gratification because on a base level, if we're competing, like if we're trying to get as many people as possible to come to us, then we have to compete on the lowest common denominator, which is our attraction for the new, the novel, and the exciting, right? And we're all attracted, whether you like it or not, because we're biologically hardwired to like the new, right? It attracts the sensations and the excitement, right? Like the stimulation, right? So that's the easiest way to get as many people as possible quickly because that's the most easy way to attract people, right? And of course, we also have other levels, but those people have to be. They're the higher level of, let's say, aspirant who realizes that okay, there's more than just having a fun class where I got to do a handstand, and there maybe there's something, but there's something more than I'd like to learn about this, right? There's your Stiram Sukha, my charging or energizing the spine, but this takes there's a fewer people that are going to be interested in this, right?
Who actually go to learn. That's what I was writing. I won a few people over who now do seem to be showing up to want to learn, but they didn't necessarily start that way. And a lot of people, like you said, they're not looking to learn. And you go to a class that's about learning, you're not that into it.
And the current generation doesn't want, there's no hierarchy allowed, right? You cannot, going back to my point of hierarchy, because it's a subtle point, because of course there has to be some recognition that the teacher has something to teach you that you want, that you don't currently have, right? And that doesn't need to be done in a kind of rigid and hierarchical and bullying manner.
Sure.
But so on the other hand, I'm not saying, yes, I've nothing to give, just come and I'm just going to I'll hold the door open and give you a pat on the back. Of course, the idea is that, we've done it for a long time. We might have something to give. It's just a question of how to apply that. And also, in this current generation where autonomy is valued over anything and the hierarchy is generally dismissed, that people don't want to give over at any point any kind of sense of their self-sovereignty to think about, or maybe I don't know. Maybe they could teach me, right? I just want to come and do a class. I want to practice how I want to practice, and if you don't give me that, then I'll find the next person who will allow me to do what I want to do, right? There is that, of course. That's also part of human nature, Yeah,
I think so. I guess in a way it's, you're right. I do think that there's a sort of things that are happening. Some of it's human nature, some of it's conditioning. We've got a lot of cultural conditioning on people right now. that I think does affect the way people are showing up. I was talking about that, the way that like the internet has changed the way people do schedule things in their lives. And, even the way that yoga's become more of a subscription service, I do think that's kind of changed the habits. I guess the other part of the evolving relationship to teachers does have to do with practice. And it does bring me a little bit back to the Ashtanga system, which I have questions about, because I think folks like yourself, and I know other folks, are teaching Ashtanga yoga in a way that isn't asserting that same kind of somatic dominance on people, is allowing it to be more of a dialogue or an inquiry, and letting people set boundaries in it more. There's like a lot more. I've said, in the old days, if you couldn't do it, you got sent to the back of the room. But nowadays,
even
there's a lot. And even, more recently, supposedly, as I understand it, the new thing that Sharat was bringing out at the very end was essentially pointing towards some of the things that we're talking about, some kind of acknowledgement that there should be a version of the Ashtanga series that allows to adapt for different bodies and needs. It seemed to be like that was, I forgot the name of, there was some new series that they were putting out.
Yes, the active series.
The active series.
Yeah.
But do you think that's accurate? Do you think that it was moving in that direction already, that there was some recognition that there needed to be a difference in what the approach was?
I think it was understood that series wasn't for the Ashtanga practitioners. So that series was for people teaching yoga in a gym, or, like the people doing it in an office for 30 minutes, or, that there was still this idea that it wasn't like a pick or choose. Oh, you could do that in a Mysore classroom. Or I don't feel that, it was meant in that manner, but we don't know. Right. But that's how I understood the people that were in Mysore latterly, suggesting that it wasn't really like a alternative in Mysore. It was more like, this is for normal people that are practicing Ashtanga kind of thing. But I think, of course, it came from Sharat traveling around and seeing, like, yes, Marichasana D, ridiculous for most bodies, right? Like,
I literally blew my knee out working on that pose.
Of course. So many people did, right? Because there's no prep. It's not a system of methodically to opening the hips, of course.
But even if there was a methodic system of opening the hips, we both know, depending on the shape of your bones, it might never be appropriate. Femur
and your acetabulum, it may be that it'll be bone on bone, as Paul Gwilly or Bernie would say. So yeah, of course, Sharat, as an intelligent human being, was seeing this as well. But would it have expanded outwards from, as if we're speculating on the Ashtanga that we know? I don't think so. I think it would have remained the same. And I think because also there is all this authentic Ashtanga teacher, right, which comes from Mysore. I'm an authentic teacher. I teach traditionally. That means that I will stop you. That means if you can't perfect the posture, then you won't be doing the next posture. And I've been to Mysore, and I'm authorized. So it kind of goes hand in hand almost with selling yourself as an authentic traditional teacher who's authorized is part, and that's always part of the methodology. I think that people are going to say, they're going to shout me down on that, I think, but I think it's kind of part of it, right? That and in this competitive marketplace, that authenticity, right, an authentic and traditional Ashtanga teacher, it was somewhat situated on that, which is funny, as I always say. When people say, "Well, you're not traditional," don't say that that's traditional because it's not Ashtanga. It's not Ashtanga. And I say, well, you know what? Like Pattabhi Jois in the early days, look at the way he taught the early students, right? He taught them very liberally. He allowed variation. He allowed individual bodies to reflect their capacities in the early days, and it gradually became more codified and systematic as it went on, as more people came. And you have to teach, if you've got loads and loads of people, of course, you have to have a very clear fixed system. When you've got a few people, it's like, well, yeah, okay, you can't do that, but can you do this? You can have a conversation. Where Sharat's there in the room, he's got 100 people every hour, passing through. I mean, in the later days, there are so many people there, right? You can't have a conversation. You can't know individual bodies. Having said that, if people did come for a number of years and they were older, if they were older, they often were allowed more leniency if you started to recognise them. So But that's not the way that I think that often the let's call them the modern Ashtanga teacher, the ones that came from, say, like 2000 later, 2010 maybe onwards, roughly speaking, that they still took it more literally. And when they came home and they only had 10 students or 15, and they could work individually, they still chose to work in the model of Mysore, which was homogenized because it had to be. So that's the discrepancy. I don't pit it on Shirat, although there's some, I have mixed feelings, obviously, about Shirat, and I expressed them on his passing, but really, a lot of it was logistical. He couldn't afford to teach individually because of the sheer numbers. But the teachers that he taught obviously could, but they weren't really, to be fair, they weren't really encouraged to teach differently to what they learned there. You see what I mean? Yeah.
I do.
You're going
I
home
think,
for 10 with 10 people. You don't have to teach like I'm doing.
I've talked to people who said, they learned Ashtanga yoga where the first day they came, they got one sun salutation and sent home. And then they came back the next day and they built it in a more gradual way. Even someone like Danny Paradise, who spent a month in Hawaii or whatever, learning the primary series or something, there was sort of a process of whether or not it was appropriate for someone to move on. Like sometimes it wasn't always seeming to me to be just about gatekeeping, but like an appropriate amount, like you're saying, of whether or not it's appropriate for someone. If someone has a physical ability to do it, then it would be appropriate for them to move on and have some more of those poses. And if not, then you'd be staying where you were in it, because it wasn't about trying to accomplish it necessarily. However, I will say that one of the signatures of Ashtanga yoga that I do think has become part of the larger yoga world is the hands-on, what we used to call adjustments, and now we sometimes call assisting. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because, I have definitely noticed, I don't know if you have, but recently, like, I keep tabs. I know you have a podcast and you're out there and you look at Instagram and you kind of see how people are promoting their things. And when people pay for sponsored stuff that lands into your feed and whatnot. And there's certainly been an uptick in videos of teachers doing hands-on adjustments to a student. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, not at all. I thought you were going to say the opposite. It has been it's more so, right? Okay. Right.
I think what you said earlier is right. There was a very organic evolution, and I've been talking about it for years, of individual teachers kind of not within the circles, not going to Mysore every year or whatever, or just out there in their communities. They got trained and then they were teaching classes, and they're teaching at the community center, and grandma's coming. And so they're just naturally making changes to what they're doing to meet the needs of people. I think that's happened. And maybe, the active series is some kind of acknowledgement of that, but it was interesting what you said about that. But I also think that when it comes to if people want traditional yoga, sometimes those hands-on things are still considered that. And I've seen more teachers demonstrating asana again. Like for a while, it was kind of frowned upon to be using your asana to impress everybody else to get them to come. And now I see, you're going to get this special treatment because now we're done with the consent chips and we can all come over and do the old school stuff again. I don't know if you've seen that or if people listening have seen that, but part of it feels like people wanting to kind of, if you're niching now, because we're niching, some people who are wanting to hold to a traditional type of practice, that's what they're promoting, those elements. And I know people who do that. I know people who teach in a Mysore style and are loving, wonderful people who I don't think are being gatekeepers and dominating, but there's still an aspect of the whole idea that that's what you're supposed to do, or that's what a teacher does, helps you come from, a big back bend to standing and back down again, or whatever that move is. That at some point, don't we need to take that off the table too, if we're actually going to do what we're saying?
That was done in Mysore. I mean, the adjustments were the main way of teaching in Mysore, right? I mean, again, because that was always the way it was. It wasn't, Pattabhi Jois couldn't speak much English. Latterly he spoke a bit more, but he wasn't teaching, that wasn't really the way he taught. Of course, Iyengar taught a lot more technique, but that wasn't the Ashtanga thing, right? So it was the adjustments that, Pattabhi Jois had the narrative that it opened the body, that you could open the body through giving way, that would give, so basically submitting to the adjustment, which I know it was risky at the start and it remained risky up until this day, right? Many early teachers got injured in Mysore, and that was one of the early reasons I must have to say in my back pocket about doing the podcast was I really felt like the adjustments are a bad thing. I mean, like in other words, taking your body from what it cannot do, from its edge of, let's say, active range of motion to a passive range of motion. That's a bad thing. You want active range of motion to contain the stretch. You do not want to be pushed past your end range motion, right, to something which is basically dangerous, destabilizing the body. So, that was one reason I really got into interviewing these early teachers and talking about adjustments and their experience of Mysore, because, a lot of them would say, look, I never liked the adjustments. Like David Williams, I always thought the adjustments were dangerous. And he was the first man to be taught by Pachama Joyce. And I didn't like them, and I wanted to get the knowledge and get out of there as soon as possible without being injured. Of course, he was injured by Pachama Joyce, and most people were injured by these adjustments. And then that kind of pattern of abuse carried on in Ashtanga with these adjustments. I mean, much less so with Sharata, I have to say, who was much less forceful than Pachama Joyce. But I mean, if I go to any yoga student nowadays, any Ashtanga workshop or something I'm teaching in a city, I can say who the people that have been injured in that class, I'm going to say over 50%, more than 70% is been through being adjusted, which is insane.
That's crazy.
And it's such a bad indictment for Ashtanga that it's like the teachers themselves, right? They're going they're meant to be the kind of doctors, or actually they're injuring the teachers. I mean, the students. This is nuts. I mean, it'd be kind of funny if it weren't for the fact that it's really, really hurt people, for the long term. So there's a sense of anger and indignance that keeps me on this work, to be honest, in battling these adjustments, which is why I told you, don't get me started on the adjustments, because it really is my particular, bête noire. But I find that these just give Ashtanga a bad name and have just ruined people. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, Jake, ruined people's lives. I get personal messages on every month where someone has said, I've been battling this injury now I've had for years, and not only does it stop me practicing anymore, something that I loved, it stops me and my quality of life altogether. I was like, can you imagine that that's actually happening still? So, I can't really see that. I mean, many things I can see both sides of the story. I really pride myself on the ability to have a nuanced kind of talk, but I can't really do that with adjustments. I mean, if we call it assistance, physical assistance, that's a different story. People always get me on that. Oh, do you say no hands at all? No, of course not. Yes, we could guide people with our hands and help them with their hands. It doesn't mean pushing people further than they can go naturally. That's two different things, which are clear and obvious, I think. Yeah.
I think you're right. That's exactly where I was going, that I think there has been a big move away from putting hands on people because of what you're saying. I think you're right that people pushing someone's body to do something that they can't do on their own, or someone submitting to someone else to get their body into something is dangerous and is the cause of a lot of injuries. And even more than that, it is a pattern. It is a patterning of relating to your body in a way that people do in their own practice afterwards. It actually conditions their practice in a way that moves away from Sthira Sukha, if you ask me. So at the same time, there is a use of touch, as you were just saying, that can actually be helpful. Like if you're not trying to push someone in, but your hands are there and they're breathing and feeling their breath in a new way. Or I do think that there's a case I can make for taking some of the effort out of a pose for someone so that they can feel more supported in and have a sense of it and actually learn. But it's only so good as that they can end up doing that on their own without you. That's my feeling. Is like, if they can't do it on their own without me, I don't know that I've really done anything for them. And that is a change. That is a change in terms of what touch is for in practice. And it's what you said earlier. It does come to a fundamental idea, like we were talking earlier, like what are the poses for? If it's not about accomplishing asana, then you're not, me getting you into a bigger position or into a position that you can't do on your own isn't doing anything. It's no accomplishment. It's no goal to be had. We're letting go of that. And that is the change, isn't it?
I think what we're circling around here is that when we're talking about tradition in the first place, it's an open book. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, asana practice is a 20th century phenomenon. This doesn't mean that asana wasn't practiced before, but it was as an auxiliary practice, as part of something else, as part of a cog, a multifaceted cog to the wheel of yoga. The asana practice as an exclusive yoga practice in and of itself is a new thing. right? So
Right.
Pattabhi Jois was grappling with how he might extrapolate on that, talking about sweating, purification, body opening. Iyengar was grappling with that, talking about alignment and how that affected the mind when the mind has, become balanced because through the body being balanced. Desikachar from his, Krishnamacharya was, also offering his own ideas upon that. They've all offered, right? Like, what is this modern tradition of yoga that we're talking about? So, I do think that it's up to us to, now to say how we would like to go forward with this. I mean, being respectful of, trying to be informed, obviously, trying to read old texts, but also with a critical eye, saying, what, like Patanjali, maybe there's some things we can take, and maybe there's some things that aren't good. Bhagavad Gita, a book, as you mentioned earlier, for householders. But, for God's sakes, I mean, we're not, we're not going to want to get rid of all desires and all emotions and simply do our duty. I mean, that seems like a rather kind of colorless kind of life to lead, right? Like,
that's only one interpretation. I got like 4 other people coming on here saying Bhagavad Gita says something different than that, but it's still a good point that you're making.
It kind of pretty much, the idea of tyag, right? I mean, let's suppose from so it's a reaction against sannyas, right? You can do tyag in life, right? So you're not completely sannyasin, you're not completely renouncing, but you just simply renounce and live. So you're doing your duty, doing your dharma. I can only go so far with that. I mean, right. The thing is, we could use these techniques as tradition from the verb transdari, to give over. We have to use these techniques effectively for where we find ourselves now, and how we want to use yoga now, and how much we want to go. If you're in a monk, as I said, in a cave, then it's going to be a different thing, right? If you're living with your teacher, as a guru, and you've given your whole life to yoga, of course we're going to have to treat it very differently. But we're doing yoga a few times a week. You got a job, you got a family. Can you still get the benefits out of the teaching? Yes, of course, but you're going to have to reappraise that.
Maybe if there's seriously. A class that actually is rooted in it and it isn't just a workout. That's the whole point I was saying earlier. If the only classes people go to, like, because that's been the argument all these years. Like, it's fine that there's all these hot classes and all these fitness classes because it brings people in the door, and then people are going to find their way to deeper teachings. But right. As you said earlier, if it's only ever being presented as this like standalone thing that's on par or the same as Pilates, really, just a little bit different, I don't know that it does. I think you said it in your manifesto and I said it in my thing. Is it becoming extinct? You used the word extinct, and I used the same word, and it came out because
I think that there was only. I mean, if you look back, yoga was only given to a very few people, right? The guru took a very few disciples. So similarly to now, it's like we can understand that the majority of people are maybe on a deeper level. I think, everyone, as I said, is looking to resolve the sense of perennial unsatisfactoriness about life, which everyone feels. But are people really going to take the initiative themselves, or are they going to rely on stimulus and torpor, right? Like the excitement is distraction, and then distraction by shutting down, and kind of ping pong between the two poles. And there's very few people that are actually going to say, okay, well, I'd be ping ponging between excitement and just shutting down by binge watching Netflix and intaking different substances, and actually I'm going to try to do something about this, right? That's only be the domain of a few people, I think, and it's only ever going to be the domain of a few people. So I think we can always expect that many people come into the class, maybe they're only going to want to or be able to use yoga so much, right? I mean, I think that'll always be the case. But as I said, if people do, I still believe if people were to stick with something for a period of time, and that's to do with the very relationship. I think you're doing great work in your community, your local studio that you've opened, because it's to do with relationships, isn't it? The relationship between two people. That's why I say that again. We can find the root of yoga here. Guru Shishya relationship is still relevant. It defines yoga. The individual relationship between two people is very relevant, but we can't define it as guru shishya. I'm not a guru and I don't have disciples, but is my relationship to individual students important and fundamental in the process? Yes, which is what does define it. If people stick with you in one-to-one relationship for a period of time, whatever you're doing, whether you're doing weights or whether you're doing yoga, right, it will fructify as something deeper than just that. Yeah. And we don't need to be doing the asanas. We could do it with all different things. I mean, Krishnamacharya was, he was playing around with different things. Next door to him, there was a guy, VK Iyer doing bodybuilding in the Mysore Palace, also using yoga. the asanas are a vehicle, really,
I think that's right. I see it in like whatever, my daughter's viola teacher or whatever. like
Yeah.
She's been with her for years and years now. We know her, like there's a thing that happens when someone's engaged in an activity and there's an instructor helping you learn the thing or whatever it is. That is an exchange between people. And I think yoga is a very kind of clear encapsulation of that, because it's not like an instrument that you're playing or some other thing. It's just you and your breath and your body. That's kind of the object of observation that we're engaging in together. So it's a very like immediate, I think Hatha yoga is a vehicle for this kind of exchange between people in a very deep way for that reason.
I guess in the end, when you're practicing something in the end and you've got someone there with you, sooner or later, it's not about the practice, is it? Because you reach a ceiling, right? And you're with someone who's fairly opaque. I mean, I think the importance of a certain opaqueness in the teacher is important as well. So you don't just start to have this kind of chummy relationship with them, right? And so really, you can't but be thrown back on yourselves, right? The practice isn't necessarily going anywhere in terms of, you've reached a certain advancement that, you're kind of plateauing at. The teacher isn't in this, matey relationship either. So they're a little bit of a, somewhat of a mirror, although they're not trying to be a mirror. That would be further than I would believe that their capacity should be. Therefore, you're kind of just thrown back on your own process. You've nowhere to go but your own self and your own rubrifications. So, it does become something more than that. It can't but it does take I think it does take consistency. It does take a teacher with the same understanding, the same reasonable mindset about it, and it does take let's say an exclusive, I hesitate to say in this modern dynamic of yoga teachers, a somewhat exclusive relationship between two people. It doesn't work so well like any relationship, your marriage, if you start to have like a whole bunch of other people come into the fray, right? Like, I mean, not to say that, you can't then go off to another teacher, so, of course, but I think, a certain time with one person that really can, in my own experience, really can help a lot too.
I think you're right. You said it earlier, like someone has to take initiative. I know Desikachari used to always say it has to come from them. And there's stories of him spending time with students and just like hanging out with them and having tea. I think it was Eric Schiffman who said this on my show. And he kept wondering when Desikachari was going to teach him anything. And then one day he asked a question and it led to like hours of lecturing. And he realized, all I have to do is ask questions and he'll teach me stuff. That idea, even like when the student's ready, the teacher appears, like that old expression that we heard when we first came into it in the 90s or whatever. Like, I think you're right. I think it is maybe it doesn't scale up. That's what happened. We tried to scale everything up in sort of a commercialization fashion, and it can only scale up so much before it kind of loses some of the essential dynamics that are necessary for this. See, I think of it as yoga pedagogy. Like, to me, I'm trying to stay true to what you're saying. I think there's a process that I've observed that happened in myself through practice and has happened in observation of other people sharing practice with me. That's very much what we're talking about. In some level, the asanas do not matter. Like, it doesn't even matter what asanas we do. Although making intelligent choices about what asanas we're going to do definitely helps. But it isn't about that. It is about some kind of coming together and some kind of shared humanity and shared inquiry and friendship. And there's a healing process that happens for me and for people who share in it with me. And it's very beautiful. It's why I still love it. And wanting to kind of stay true to that and gentle as the new advance was me trying to market that. But at a certain point, we're kind of, there is a dilemma. I talked about this over-justification effect, where if I need money from doing this and I have to do certain things to get money that would jeopardize that process, I have a dilemma to face about how I'm going to reconcile that,
Yeah.
Go ahead. If you were going to say something, go ahead.
No, just in as much as, I suppose, to go back to that question of how many people really, are walking around really kind of inquiring about existence on a daily level. Well, extrapolate, they go into a yoga class. And it's like, how many people do already or do want to necessarily go to that place in a yoga class. I mean, I still hesitate to say that there's no reason for a yoga class, because I do think there's something, physically different to the asanas, right? I mean, they're all based on stimulating the spine with flexion, torsion, extension. They're all hugely based on stimulating the nerves of the spine. So, I do think there's something specific about the asanas themselves, and practicing with the group, and the democratization of yoga that we've had in the 20th century. Just to say, well, up to you. You don't have to aspire to the highest thing. You can still come to the class. You can still get some benefit, and yeah.
I appreciate that. I think that's right. I like the way that sounds. I guess the other thing I'm thinking about is one of the things I really appreciated from your show recently was you speaking so candidly about your hip surgery, because I remember when I first started this show in 2015, 2016, one of the things was a feeling like people weren't really saying what was going on. Like, I knew a really well-known yoga teacher who'd gotten a hip replacement surgery and not told anybody. And I got it on the down low from someone who knew them that had happened. And I was just like, wow, that seems to me like a big issue. Like, if you've made a career on you being able to put your leg behind your head in a way that nobody else can, and then you've gotten a hip replacement and then you don't tell anybody about it, it seemed like an issue. So I know that, I had a hip stuff.
It turned out like an issue.
Well, it turned out for me, I ended up having labral tears. So I wasn't actually a candidate for a hip replacement. And I've actually managed to really turn it around in a lot of ways because of the information I got and some other things I learned about my gait and a whole bunch of other stuff. You did end up having surgery done.
I guess I had a hip replacement 3 months ago. Yeah, the whole
3 months ago. So that was my question. So how much
femur sawed off and replaced by a ball? Yeah.
Okay, so how long was that bothering you? What made you finally decide to go get it treated? Say a little something about it.
I always thought it was my lower back. I kind of thought it was right side of the lower back. So I didn't even realize it was hip. But I mean, the guy, the surgeon, he said that I could have had it done in my 30s or earlier. But it was always like basically the how do they call it? A dysplaxic hip, so a shallow hip. The socket was no good in the first place, a little bit shallow. And so the femur was always kind of bumping around in that area. I do think that probably, it's latch and key, isn't it? I mean, I think anything or many things that I could have done physically would have aggravated that genetic tendency, right? So, I'd done nothing at all. I think I probably have an absolutely fine hip. But I mean, if I'm going to do anything that's kind of dynamic and affect, and especially yoga, which has affected a lot of their rotations that are extreme rotations, let's be honest. That was going to happen.
A leg behind the head stuff and lotus work and.
Yeah, it's not to say that it didn't hurt at the time. It didn't really give me many warning signs, and then suddenly it did actually. So. Yeah, do I feel inauthentic about teaching leg behind the head and stuff like that now would be a question. I say no. I mean, because I don't push people into it. I mean, I'll also give them the opportunity. Look, it's extreme. You don't need to do that. Move on. You don't have to do that posture. The next one's not related to that one. As I say, it doesn't go, the secret is, in my mind, don't go incrementally. So, you can move on and you can skip, you can modify, you can use a placeholder instead of that, or something that does feel relevant. Because, it's an extreme movement. And I think these movements have been normalized in Ashtanga. So, because so many people we see doing them, that you think, well, it's normal for an average body to be able to put their leg behind their head. No, of course it's not. I mean, it's an anatomical anomaly, but it's self-selecting, isn't it? Because yoga is self-selects, right? Those people that are in the classroom, they're already usually the ones that are the 1.1, the 0.1% of most naturally able people. And a lot of the yoga stuff demands all this hip stuff. So yeah, I mean, I felt it was important and about time to be honest about my situation, and also say, look, it's not. It doesn't have to be a mark of the Ashtanga. It just maybe also is a sign of, just be careful, because did it do it to me? No, I don't think it actively did it to me. But did it cause it? Yes, in a certain sense. I mean, there was something which was waiting to happen, and the Ashtanga allowed that to happen, right? So, it's and would it happen to everyone? Does it? No, of course not. I mean, and is my other hip fine? Absolutely. So that, so that's another argument. If I say it happened to both hips, well, that would be a little bit.
You were putting both legs behind, so you'd figure both of them.
No, yeah, exactly. So what I'm saying is that because it happened to one hip, then we could say, well, inherently perhaps it wasn't Ashtanga. I don't want to be an apologist for these movements because they are extreme, but my other hip is absolutely fine. So unless it goes right, I'm still going to say that it's not inherently the movements of Ashtanga, that many people do, and I see many people do them for many years, right? I think at a certain point, you need to back off doing things like leg behind head, because it's not an older person's game, really. It demands a level of flexibility and mobility that you lose as you get older. I mean, you don't lose strength as quickly, but you lose this kind of mobility. So at a certain point, I think, probably most people need to tone that down. But many people can get away with it for years, and obviously they have no hip problems. So it's not inherently Ashtanga, but I definitely wanted to flag that up, that it could be, and it can, and it certainly can cause early, as much as it might prevent certain conditions from happening. I mean, it could, my doctor suggested maybe it prevented your hip, from happening so early. I suggest the otherwise. I still will say no. Actually, no. I think it actually exacerbated it. Probably, the surgeons, they don't think that you're doing Ashtanga, do they? They think you're doing some kind of remedial hatha yoga, right? Like, they just assume when you say yoga,
they don't even know. They don't know always one from the other.
Yeah, they just think you're doing a natural forward fold and a few candles and a bit of incense, kind of jumping around with legs behind head. So yeah.
All right. Well, how's the experience of having the surgery done? Do you feel an alleviation of pain? Do you feel better having the intervention done?
Yeah, absolutely. I was having pain in the end in walking, and it just felt really unstable. The main thing is it felt really, really unstable. Like, just didn't feel confident to push through it, in climbing stairs and things. So I was compensating and I felt more imbalanced in my whole body, right? If you can imagine that one leg just isn't, firing as it should. So it was that kind of thing that really made me do it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I don't think I'll ever get that mobility back in the hip that I had. But the strength is there. The strength has come. But the mobility, things like even like Lotus. I mean, I know many people that have got that back, that are coming out of the woodwork now as teachers and stuff, and saying, oh, I've had it done as well. But I'm not hoping. I mean, I've done that kind of stuff. I'm not hoping for that to come back necessarily, as long as it feels functional and strong. And I'm happy there, But I really wanted to do that service for Ashtanga teachers and say, look, you don't have to present yourself as this godlike kind of phenomenon for people to buy into you as a teacher, and say, and actually to show a fallibility, to show a weakness is, it's okay, and it's important to have that dialogue in the yoga world, and it's honesty, right?
That's what I so appreciate about what you're doing, because I couldn't agree more. I guess that was going to be my question, like, in what ways is your practice in teaching changing, having had this surgery done? And you even just said it there, but even baked into kind of your comment there was this, oh, will I be able to do Lotus again or not?
No, it wasn't
as though that actually matters about anything at all. I let go of Lotus pose years and years ago. I can't find a good reason for a lot of these poses anymore. Right. So that's what I mean. Is there a letting go of a lot of these more advanced poses, or whatever we used to call them? I don't even think them as advanced. If they're hurting you, they're not more advanced in my book, Yeah,
I mean, I do feel that the stuff with the hips is relevant, again, because my line in the sand it comes back to the sacrum, right? We're not raising Kundalini, but there's some energy at the sacrum. Therefore, we've got all this Lotus stuff, because otherwise you can say, well, completely random. The yoga, it's just all these weird postures related to Lotus. Like, no other thing does this. So why the Lotus? Well, again, Hatha yoga, to do with energy of the sacrum. So do they matter? Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to stimulate energy. I do think it matters. Do I need to do Lotus now? No, I don't think I do. I think I've got to, I did it. I mean, remember, I started when I was like 19 or 20, like it's daily practice, right? So I'm now almost 47. So I kind of feel like I had my time in doing what needs to be done on that physical level. And now it'll be just kind of like, I use yoga, but it's not, asana isn't my mainstay of my yoga practice.
I mean, that's what I was sort of getting at, though. Like, is there, whatever it is that you got from Lotus in the past, is it Lotus specific? Is like the physical position the thing that does it? Or is the energy body that linearly collected to the physical body? I don't know that it is. That's what I'm saying. I feel like there's maybe ways to bring that about without us potentially having to rip apart our bodies.
I think there's many things going on, right? As you said, the Sthiram Sukham and the idea of the individual, the active and the passive sense of self, just consistency, relationships in a classroom, doing something for yourself, for your own kind of mental stability, regularly, and then the possibility of the energetic aspect of the asanas as well. But have many people had spiritual experiences without ever touching yoga? Of course. So it's not inherently that you have to do these things. I'm not saying that whatsoever. And yeah, certainly I've put away any need to stick legs behind the head. Currently, and probably forever. But I do think that the doing something with the hips is at the root of hatha yoga. So I do think it differentiates the yoga asana. Before we, if we throw that away, then we maybe have to ask questions about the asana a little bit, I'd say. Yeah.
I think you're right, and ultimately, I think we've come to a lot of the same place in it, that when you take away like the asana as the goal, or if it's not about accomplishing physical forms, then the use of asana takes on very different purpose and becomes much more of a container and vehicle, and like the ritual of practice is this relational thing. And that is what Desikachar taught. He said yoga is relationship. So there's relationship between you and your own breath and body, and then you and your environment and other people. And the more that I've come to see the practice and like whatever my role as a yoga teacher having to be with that, it actually is way more sustainable and interesting. And I don't have to put myself in the same kind of authority position that we saw other teachers put themselves in and then have issues, even still to this day as we started today. That part of this new territory for modern yoga teachers to sort of have an authenticity in what they're doing requires a lot of the kind of transparency that both you and I are trying to exercise in our podcasts, because that is the model. Like if we're going to hold ourselves to account, sometimes like creating conditions where you actually admit to your own fallibilities and you learn a little bit in public, if you're being a public voice, then that seemed to me to be a way to kind of mitigate the kind of inherent pitfalls that are there when you do assume the role of teacher and you're facing this way and everybody else facing the other way, or whatnot.
Yeah, and just to go back to questioning what is it, it's up to us to define and to keep redefining what is the relationship of the individual to the yoga teacher, right? As we go along and society changes, that also has to reflect and help society as well. Okay, I think, it was way too heavy-handed when yoga, really exploded on the scene, and it was much too much the authority of the teacher, and the student was completely at let's say the beck and call of the teacher. And now it's kind of swung the other way, where almost like the teacher is trying to get the student, and the student has all the, holds all the cards because, the teacher desperately needs enough students, right? So then it's like, well, what do they want, right? The teacher's now kind of second guessing, to provide what the student wants, right? When it was the other way around. And perhaps we could swing back to a happy medium at some point, or I hope so, right? Where there's a mutual relationship which is a little bit more balanced, because, I think, essentially, as I've said, if we're not doing the yoga of pre-20th century, in India, what are we doing now, right? I mean, we have to define and make useful yoga in the current context. Yeah.
I agree, and I guess I think that happens on like a practice level in the practice spaces, but I also think that there is a dilemma, as I was saying, where in the past, I felt like there was maybe more room for yoga teachers to be shaping the market in directions that we wanted to see it go. And now, as you sort of said and pointed to, there's more pressure on teachers to have to kind of conform to the demands of the market to survive, and finding ways to kind of, I guess if you don't have to make a living at it or you have other resources, that alleviates it. That's why I was sort of asking about that. That's one way to alleviate that pressure on you to try to go teach at the hot center or whatever it is. But yeah, I guess the other thing that's coming to mind that I really appreciate that I want to mention, just to make sure people listening to this know that I have really enjoyed watching you do your podcast over these last 4 years, because I remember when we first spoke and you were sort of a little more green at it and you were new at it, and we had a little bit of a conversation about podcasting. And it's been really great to see you engage with it in such a cool way, because I get a lot from it, hearing you do it and get like bigger name teachers. You got Rodney. I was like, what? But I was so happy for you, because I know what it's like to like, what it means to have to try to have those conversations with all these different kinds of people. So I wanted to make a point of giving you a little kudos and props for the work that you've been doing on your podcast, because it is a labor of love, I know. And I imagine
it's taught me so much. I mean,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like continuing education, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, then you read a book and you think, oh, I'd love to talk to the author of that, or so, and then you're actually able to have this conversation and then, share it with other people. It's just I kind of find it as absolutely wonderful opportunity that has just occurred. And it's incredible, isn't it? The resources that we have. I mean, I've listened to your podcast regularly. I've enjoyed it. I mean, Godfrey Devereux episode was excellent. I remember
I did 3 with him. He was so good. Yeah, I kept bringing him back.
So and that sticks in my mind. But so many episodes have been great. I listened to many other yoga teachers' podcasts, right? Yoga Land. Yeah, with Jason and his wife, and loads of podcasts, and you get so much. I mean, this is the thing, that the student now has so much information at their fingertips. So and so much opportunity to go, I want to take a class now with Adam Keen, or I want to take a class with Jay, because I've just seen him on the podcast, right? So there's this opportunity and fluidity, and how do we deal with that? Because things are changing so fast, right? It wasn't like at a time it was like, well, where's the Ashtanga teacher? There might be one Ashtanga teacher in the whole of the UK, and you go to see them and you're incredibly grateful, and they define your complete context of Ashtanga. Now the context is so massive, so really the impetus and the responsibility is thrown back on the student as to how they navigate their journey more than ever, really, with the amount of information that they have at their hands. You can use it skillfully, but it could also really decimate your practice at the same time. So it's a question of us, to sort through this information, and take responsibility of how we want to use it.
Yeah, I guess my last curiosity is more about like what it looks like for you. As you said, you don't have children right now, and you are kind of making your way as a teacher. So do you have like a regular schedule of weekly classes that you do at a local center? Are you mainly doing retreats? Like
I do online Mysore, Ashtanga Mysore style every day, and I do that on Zoom. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And that's just like a group you've collected over the years on your email list.
Absolutely, anyone can come. I mean, it's UK timing, so it's early morning for many people. Like in your guests, a lot of them being in the US, it doesn't work for them. 6 in the morning till 8:30 UK time. So that doesn't catch many people. But the Europeans, just drop in and out. They come when you fancy. Just there's no, mainly it's a lot.
And
is
it led? Are you lead it, or they just come and do their own?
It's a style. Yeah, it's a self practice. Yeah.
So can you still kind of speak to people's individual practice online?
More than ever, because you haven't got everyone in the room, so you don't have to keep people to program so much, because it's not like someone will say, oh, they're doing that, and start to kind of, you can allow people a lot more to go off piste, because you're not having to teach collectively. So it's a very good modality. I mean, it has its drawbacks, but it really works well to complement studio practices. So I do that, and then just traveling around. I'm going to the US next year. Going to do a couple in the East Coast and the US, which I'm looking forward to. It's my first time.
Okay.
And and very hard to get for a European teacher to get over to the US, right? You have to really work with your
travel is not the same. The travel is not the same as it used to be. That's one of the big differences. Sometimes it's not easy to get these things going, Is it when you go, are you being hosted? Are you doing your own events?
No, I'm in a fortunate position still that I just go to people that ask me to come. So if I get asked, then often try and make it to come. And so, currently don't have a home. I mean, we were living in France for a couple of years. You got me at the tail end of lockdown, I believe. Yeah. And now since then, we kind of moved to Bali for a while, but then we got asked to come back to Europe a lot. So Teresa and I basically just going from one to the next, try to find a place, a base. But we haven't, for good or for bad, we're just kind of going, okay, we're here now in Athens, there we're going, to the next one, then the next one. So we kind of just literally kind of trotting around the world, as it were. But we're looking to try and settle down and have a little bit more of a stable life. But that's how it's going currently. We've got a year full of schedule of just of going around teaching where people would like me to come, which is again very, very, very fortunate and grateful for that.
Well, I did exactly what you're saying for about 3 years when my children were younger. And it definitely is. I've mentioned it on the show recently. I mean, it's a lifestyle thing. You're like on the road. And in a way, it's very conducive for you that you don't have a house waiting down. You don't have to get your kids to practice or whatever. So you actually have a life situation that would support you being able to do what you're doing, as I did at another time. But sometimes I think it's glamorized, like, the traveling yoga teacher, international yoga teacher. And it's actually a pretty hard grind, it's not as glamorous as it's made out to be, No.
And I mean, I think for many people, it doesn't encourage the best situation either, because it can really, especially for a solo male teacher, perhaps traveling around,
Yes.
I think it can easily encourage not the best situations, let's say.
See, circling back around to where we started. But
I've been married to Teresa for, almost 20 years. No, we haven't been married, but we've been together for at least 20 years. We do everything together, and we travel around together, and we have a stable kind of life together. So it feels like it's genuine, that there is a sense of groundedness, and I am able to present myself reasonably. Otherwise, I do feel if I was on my own as just a single man, I don't think that would be the best situation.
I mean, it's interesting to hear that, because that is true. I think I observed that. I observed these single men traveling around, charismatic male yoga teachers who I learned from and actually got a lot of really great practice and learning from. But I watched them transgress, and it had to do with them not being anchored in the way that you're talking. And it just became clear to me, like, that's something I want. I want to have an anchored relationship in my life. I want to have a family. So I think
without being too cliche about it, I mean, that's definitely part of the yoga approach to the whole of life, isn't it? It's like not, just not to have some sense of grounding and anchoring, as you say. I mean, albeit, the sadhu is obviously an itinerant wanderer. Nevertheless, I mean, I think they get grounded to a certain monasteries, right? Have to come back and hold some kind of accountability to their kind of a leader. So, I mean, I do think that. Yeah, that model of the traveling teacher has many drawbacks for teachers, as well as students, right? And it also encourages people, to then take a workshop just for weekends, and oftentimes the teacher feels they have to overgive, and then we get into the adjustments again. People often get the injuries of these teachers feel like, I have to give so much to the weekend, and then they
you have to come up with new workshops next year. Exactly. You can't do the same ones again and again. Like you said, it's got to be new and different all the time.
So I really try to do my best on that front, but of course, am I part of the problem?
No, you're just.
I sometimes ask myself.
I don't know. I appreciate this conversation today, Adam, and I appreciate that you're out there, because I feel like a kindredship with you, that we both, as I was saying recently, like, it's meaningful to us. Yoga's meaningful to us, or we would have given it up a long while ago. We can see it has like a real value in the world, and it brings purpose and meaning to me to be involved in it. And so there still feels like good reason to do it, even though it's harder than ever to do it. And I see you out there plugging along and sticking to your principles and your practice. And I just really value that. So thanks again.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have a chat. I didn't realize it'd be so long. And I really, really appreciate you asking me, and keep up with the podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts. So always have it on. So thanks for your work as well, Jay. Of course, great to be invited. Thanks.
Of course. Listen, I'll be in touch with you. I'll let you know when it's going to go out and stuff. Okay.
Cheers, mate.
All Cheers, brother.
Bye now.
Bye. And there you have it. What do you think? There was a lot in there to consider. And I realized that some of you who reached out to me and were hoping I was going to bring someone on to discuss what's been going on in the Ashtanga community, you probably had a different idea in mind. But I'm more interested in the conversation I had with Adam, because I think it gets to the underlying aspects of teachers and the environments that we're teaching in. This idea of somatic dominance that we referenced, where the teacher's assuming a certain role where They're going to like choose which poses you're going to do. They're going to come over to you and push your body into it to places that you couldn't get on your own. They're the ones who are like the knowledge holders who know what the alignment is so that they can instruct you on how to do the pose correctly. That's very what you might call traditional. Like most people who came into yoga before it became this big popularized thing, the teachers were more that way. And even the Western teachers were modeling what they saw in their Indian teachers. However, there's always been this evolution going on where teachers in their own spaces, when maybe they're not in view of the guru, have faced students coming in and needing to adapt to that. And I've always suspected that happened in like Mysore rooms, but maybe not. Like maybe some Mysore rooms are super strict, but I always suspected that there were plenty of people, because I had met them and would have conversations with them, that their Mysore rooms probably weren't like that, but I haven't been in them, so I wouldn't know. But Adam has, and Adam has taught in Mysore rooms, and you can hear he has spent time, as have I, really working through these things and wanting to have integrity and authenticity about what he's doing. And I appreciate how brave and bold he is to come out and make the statements he makes around adjustments and encourage people to be more fallible in public. I encourage you to go listen to his episode about his hip and stuff. Is just really refreshing and I think helpful to hear yoga teachers speak about their process and encourage other teachers to do the same. So kudos to Adam. Go check out his podcast if you're not familiar with it. And more than anything, just hang in there, my friend. Keep at it. I like listening to your show, so keep doing it, all right? Okay, what else? I am going to be continuing this conversation some next week when it comes to the way yoga teachers teach and the way that's changed over the years, and maybe some aspects of yoga philosophy that we are going to revisit. Very cool conversation next week. I'm not going to tell you who it is. You're going to have to tune in to find out. I encourage you to do so. Other than that, I mentioned in the intro that I had a few more realizations of sorts this week. And it came out of last week's episode on mindfulness some, and using mindfulness as a term to market yoga. And the first thing that happened was that I decided to write some new titles and descriptions for my classes at the center, because I did a thing where I managed to go to the website for the yoga center and just look at it for a second as though I was a complete stranger. Like you're supposed to try to do that when you're marketing things, like go to the coffee shop and have like a complete stranger look at your thing and get some feedback from them, And sometimes I can maybe achieve that in my own mind. And I did that. I went to the website and I looked at it and I realized that it looks terrible. Like I've got a weekly schedule, 6 days a week, 2 classes a day. And all the classes are the same. And it's just one teacher. It looks terrible. It's like not good marketing. And that's because that's what it is. It's me and my class is about developing a personal practice, and it adapts to you. So it can be a lot of different things. But from a marketing standpoint, it's horrible. And so I was talking in my weekly teacher song where I often work through this stuff. And my other friend, Karina, shout out to Karina, who just finished the training program, and she's been hanging out in the teacher sangha since. And she was sort of working through this with me. And she was saying, well, there's a lot of different ways that you could describe your class. What's the big deal? Why don't you come up with some new classes that you could teach? And I get so bent out of shape about that because the idea that I'm going to come up with new classes, or it doesn't really work with the pedagogy that I'm engaging with, where I'm not looking to dictate what the class is going to be before someone gets there. I want someone to come and I want to have it be in relationship to them. But how do you market that? I don't know. And the reality of it is on some level, I don't care what the classes are called. I would just like people to come and I'd like to be able to meet them. And I guess the titles and descriptions are about getting people in the door, not about like teaching the principles. So in any case, I decided to write some new titles and descriptions to put on my class. Do you want to hear them? This is what I came up with. And I'm admitting off top that I decided to like use as many catchwords as I could that seemed to go with what I do. So I've got 3 titles and descriptions I'm working with. One is gentle flow, mindful movement and breathing geared towards stress reduction. Another one is strong and calm, therapeutic strengthening that adapts to individual needs. And the third one is flex and restore, intelligent stretching with a focus on pain reduction. Oh, I can't believe I just read that out of the podcast, but especially that last one. I haven't used the word stretching in association with my yoga teaching in decades. I swore off the word stretching because everyone's thought yoga is stretching and, oh, I can't touch my toes. And I just got so fed up with the way that people thought of the idea of stretching, which is like anatomically nonsensical. But the point is, I'm trying to get over myself and people think that yoga is about stretching. So who cares if the word stretching is in the description? And so the funny thing is, I mentioned in the Teacher's Sangha that I came up with these new titles and descriptions. And Karen, who I mentioned earlier, she actually lives not that far from me, like 30, 40 minutes or something. And she asked me, she said, so wait a second, you've called your classes different names and given them different descriptions, but it's still the same class? And I said, yes, it is. And honestly, I don't know that my new titles and descriptions have brought anybody in yet, but it was fun to just write them and put them up there and kind of let go of me getting bent about it. Another thing that happened, which is sort of related, which is that a new person came this week and she was really cool. She was an occupational therapist who lives in New York and was coming to visit her mom. And I think, she went online and looked at my website and saw what I had written. It was appealing to her, even though it was just one class and one teacher. But here's the crazy thing that I'm still trying to get my mind around. You see, she almost didn't come because there was no online class registration. And fortunately, I also have written on the website that if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call me. And I put my phone number. And she called and I happened to answer. But the reality is that a lot of people, I think, if there's not online class registration, they don't feel confident that there's going to actually be a class. And Karen confirmed that to me. She said, I almost didn't come because it didn't have online registration. And I've just been trying to get my mind around that because I decided not to do online registration. And I thought of that as like a sell point almost. But I think we've gotten to a place where people go online and they say yoga near me and they're going to get like 4 or 5 yoga centers and I'm one of them. And they're going to go to those yoga center websites and all of them have online registration except me. And I think people have gotten to a place where if they go online and they register and they get an email confirmation and they pay maybe even, then they're like, okay, I'm going to yoga class. And, part of me is like, oh no, I don't want to get software. The cost of the software is like hundreds of dollars sometimes. And it's too long a conversation. I don't want to go into all the reasons why I don't want to use the online softwares that they have out there. But I think there's a chance that I could basically do the same thing myself with like a free WordPress plugin that would like give people the same user experience of being able to register for class. It's so crazy because that happened at my old center. I didn't have online registration, and then I broke down and did it. And so now when I open this place, I didn't have it. And now I feel like I should put it up there. So I don't know. I'm trying not to sound cynical. I'm trying to bring the new Sthirisuka energy to this and not get down on it, but say, okay, well, why don't I try some stuff? I'll write some titles and descriptions. The people who are already coming, they don't have to use the online registration, but why don't I put it up there and see if it makes a difference, you know? I don't know if it will, but might as well try. And it feels better to like not feel heavy about it, but just try stuff, you know? So we'll see. I'll let you know how it goes. I'll see if I can make it happen first, and then we'll see if it makes any difference. Who knows? It might be too little too late. No, see, I just let it creep back in. You see that comment right there? That's the comment that Karen was talking about. I would never make a comment like that in class. So we'll see. We'll see. I think more than anything else, I just like the feeling of being playful and curious, even when it's hard. You know, that's what I've cultivated in class, and I'm going to see if I can bring that to the other aspects of trying to have the center. So for whatever it's worth, I'll let you know how it goes. And I'm curious if anybody out there listening has thoughts on any of this stuff that Adam and I talked about today, or any thoughts on online registration, pros and cons. So don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Okay. That's enough. I certainly hope that you're doing okay and that you're managing to keep your wits about you, and that maybe you too can bring some grounded, steady energy to whatever you're facing. What do you say at the very least? We be kind. Let's be kind to ourselves. Let's be kind to others. And I will talk to you again soon. Please take care. Cheers.
Thank you.